This particular clip was pretty informative. Roland Martin does an interview with the author of a book regarding white privilege and racism. What is it like to be white? Or I believe that's the title. You'll get the full title here shortly. But it was pretty interesting in listening to her, and I thought she was pretty much spot on as far as her opinions about certain things. Now, I think she was off a little bit in some areas, but for the most part, I think she pretty much hit it. Check out the interview.
Folks, despite his blatantly bigoted rhetoric during the presidential campaign, exit polls show that Donald Trump won an overwhelming majority of white voters, both male and female, of all education levels. Is there a racial message in his election? What does that mean? You might recall when I interviewed white nationalist Richard Spencer right here on TV One. He certainly had his thoughts about that.
To be white is to be a striver, a crusader, an explorer, and a conqueror. We build, we produce, we go upward. And we recognize the central lie of American race relations. We don't exploit other groups. We don't gain anything from their presence. They need us and not the other way around.
No, of course, that was him speaking at his white nationalist meeting here, which they call the alt-right, but, well, we know the real deal is this. And to say other groups haven't been exploited, Lord, that boy need a history book. All right, folks, so the question is, how do you deal with this whole issue when you talk about white privilege, when you talk about what it means in our politics? It's a book out called What Does It Mean to Be White? Developing White Racial Literacy. Explores why most whites fail to recognize and understand racism as well as their own privilege. Joining me on Skype from Seattle is the book's author, Dr. Robin Diangelo. And Robin, I've been trying to get your book. Lord, is sold out. Is it available on Kindle as a download?
Well, not yet, but we're working on that. Hang in there, though, if it's sold out. There'll be back orders, but you'll be able to get it.
Well, obviously, people are interested because the hardcover of your book is selling for $150 on Amazon. So why did you want to do this book?
Because the average white person is in what I call is racially illiterate. Fundamentally cannot answer the question, what does it mean to be white? With any complexity or nuance whatsoever, within a society that is deeply separate and unequal by race. The average white person is going to say to you, it doesn't really mean anything to be white. And so I wanted to help white people really come to terms with how profoundly our lives are shaped by our race.
Well, and it's interesting because when I was interviewing the clueless one, Richard Spencer, and I've done this when I've spoken to other places. I've talked about affirmative action. And I've said to rooms full of women, I said, white women, you've been the greatest beneficiary of affirmative action in America. If you want to know the greatest affirmative action program, it was the GI Bill that absolutely blew up. That if you look at white wealth in America, a lot of that was really created after World War II and the GI Bill. When suburbs sprang up, black soldiers could not benefit from the GI Bill. When you talk about Social Security, that also was the exact same thing. When you talk about what was created there as well. And so when you begin to lay these things out, Robin, it's as if when I'm having discussions with whites, even individuals who are educated, they have no idea what the hell I'm talking about.
Well, because we don't know our history, and we're not taught our history, and we're unable to trace it into the present. It is not disconnected from the present.
That's not necessarily true. It's not so much that you don't know your history. That part is true. But you are taught, or history is taught in a biased manner, where major portions of actual American history are omitted, okay? And then history is taught from a point of view. Now, if it is a white point of view, i.e. majority control, you would see history one way. If it's taught from a black perspective, you would obviously see history in another way. But because there is no overall homogeneous teaching of history from an unbiased viewpoint, That's why people don't know the full history. They know some history. They know the history that is taught out of biased social studies books, principally okayed by the Texas Department of Education, that Scholastic gets its approval from before it prints and distributes its history books all over the country. And Texas is well known for its, shall we say, slanted viewpoint of American history. But let's continue.
And I don't believe we can understand the moment that we're in if we don't understand how we came to be here. But it serves us not to know our history. You know, this not knowing is not benign and it's not innocent. It's a kind of willful not knowing, because I can imagine that when you offered that to that group of white women, it isn't as if they went, "Oh, well, thank you so much. That's really helpful."
Well, in fact, it even goes deeper than that. I stood in front of another group, and I mentioned Title IX. And I said, "Who knows about Title IX?" And folks, their hands went up. And I said, that was presented as somehow for women to play sports. That's how it's been accepted. No, Title IX was about opening professional schools to women in the early 70s. I then said, where does Title IX come from? That's a provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I said, white women who became dentists and lawyers and professors and engineers benefited from black folks marching and getting that bill in 1964. And they looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. And I'm going, you need to understand really all these pieces in American history. I was in an event here in D.C. And again, very educated people, grassroots organizers, and I was talking about the election, and I mentioned Reconstruction. 3 hands out of 100 went up, and I'm going, what do y'all have no idea what's going on? And so then it becomes this whole conversation of, well, that's just not my history. I'm like, it is. That's American history.
I have this great slide that I show in my presentations of this year's College Jeopardy Champion playoffs. And you see there's 3 white players, of course, and you see the board at the end of the grand champion round, and every single category is empty. They've all been answered, except one column where not one question has been touched. And when you see what the column is, it's African American history. So let's also start with this idea that that's your history, not my history. Right, so we know what's going to be under that column. It's going to be civil rights and civil war, as if one, that's all there is, and 2, that belongs to you and I'm outside of it, as if those things happened in a vacuum.
Well, that's also one of the reasons that's very interesting when you make that particular point in terms of what that shows, and we've seen this played out in so many different areas. Hold tight 1 second. We're going to go to a break. We're going to come back.
All right, so I'm going to see if I can pick this up.
So, Dr. Diangelo, I certainly accept the premise here that whiteness is unclear. But what I put forward, though, is that white nationalists really fill a vacuum. They provide an affirmative meaning of whiteness. That's affirmative, hey, you're a conqueror, etc. Question is, what is your alternative narrative for white folks that is acceptable, palatable, that is affirming, that doesn't just tear folks down, that gives them a legitimate place of respect in American life?
You're asking me that question?
Yes, that's the question. Okay. What's the answer here? What's the answer in terms of white identity that, again, is not guilt-ridden and is just, hey, you're a bad person, but here is your place of respect within kind of a diverse America?
Well, I'm not sure you can really get there from the current paradigm. So racism is an incredibly adaptive system, right? And I think the most brilliant adaptation post-civil rights is to be a good moral person and be complicit with racism became mutually exclusive, right? You couldn't possibly be a good moral person and be complicit with racism. And I think it's the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. You suggest that I'm in any way complicit with the very system I'm essentially swimming in, and I'm going to need to defend my character. And
let me stop there and let me give you an analogy. They're always talking about good cops, okay? And they're also talking about bad cops and their deeds be covered up. Well, if the good cops are covering up the deeds of the bad cops, then how can they be good cops? They can't be. You're either one or the other. You're a good cop or you're not. If you're a good cop, you don't cover up, you expose bad deeds, etc. If you're not a good cop, okay, then you can't claim any type of moral high ground. You're just as bad as the bad cop that does the misdeed. Okay, I threw that in because it just came across my mind. Let's go back to this.
That's what we see over and over. And so I don't feel guilt-ridden at all. I'm just very, very clear that white is in itself inherently an oppressive identity. It's rooted in...
and I've got that as an academic matter. If we talk about solving this and moving forward and giving people an alternative identity that they will actually accept, what is that alternative identity?
Well, I'm not... be less white. First of all, understand what it means to be white, how it shapes your life, how it kind of causes us to come to the table and come to the table in a different way. Because the way we come to the table now basically prevents any further movement or growth in race relations and our understanding.
So Robin, what you're saying is that when whites in America talk about identity politics, they act as if they're not in that. I remember the Soledad O'Brien tweeted something out where this woman said, America's helped. They've helped Latinos. They've helped African Americans. When are they going to help real Americans? And then Soledad said, well, when will black and Latinos be in the real Americans category?
Right.
Never. And in fact, Donald Trump actually did the same thing during the campaign where he said, we're going to help the Latinos, we're going to help the blacks, as if somehow that was separate from everybody else.
And why is the concept of a white working class not identity politics? I mean, these identities do matter. They do shape our experiences in life and our opportunities. That's just...
It is, Dr. Diangelo. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the journal Race Trader, published about 20 years ago. It says treason to whiteness is loyalty to humanity. Do you ultimately see a solution to this? Or is this basically just going to continue until it has to break down, whether by demographics or just a fundamental restructuring of the social order?
Yeah, I don't think actually demographics are going to make a difference. It's about power and institutional power. I mean, we can look at South Africa under apartheid and see that it's not about numbers, right? Women are the majority of the planet. The poor are the majority of the planet. It's about institutional power, and it's deeply embedded and tightly held in a select few hands. And so that has to change. But so does our understanding of what racism is. We think about it as just individual ill will, and as long as I'm not aware of having any individual ill will, then I'm outside of all of this.
Rena?
Well, frequently this year, I got the question more than I'd like, is that did your ancestors fight for the founding of this country? And when I couldn't answer yes to that, they questioned my real American status. I mean, how much of an American are you? Well, I'm first generation, and so that challenged how I felt about my color, how I walk around this city, Washington D.C., as a young woman of color, and how to deal with my white peers, whether they be in the workplace or personally. So what I think we can do as communities of color, as religious communities, we can coalesce around something that has guided this country, that has founded this country, and it's a constitution. It has enshrined God-given rights for us, and those are equality, justice, and freedom. If we all love freedom, we can get around the idea that we're all free and equal, and there is justice for us under the law.
And I think to that point, Robin, that is a fundamental problem, and that is, Dr. King talked about this. He said, we're going to make America live up to what is on the sheet of paper. Harry Belafonte, when I interviewed him, he said, why have I remained in America? He said, because I want America to be the country it says it is, not the country it actually claims it really operates as. And so that's the real issue there. When we talk about freedom, that's what Black Lives Matter is all about, and this whole fight to get folks to understand saying, no, we want basic freedom, which means I want to be able to drive down the street and not get pulled over because I drive a nice car and you think I'm a drug dealer.
But let's be clear. Nobody has ever made any progress in this country as a group that wasn't white without having allegiances and alliances beyond these borders. See, when we make this an American conversation, we really restrict the possibilities. You see the civil rights movement really responding to international developments. And people like Paul Robeson. I mean, Belafonte talks about Paul Robeson, but we rarely talk about the international dimension of that. What you're seeing with Trumpism is a unilateral disarmament of the domestic policy agenda and a huge expansion of this international agenda that's been driven by oligarchs. In other words, they have no allegiance to the United States, but they want us to have an allegiance to the United States. But every time, Civil War, the anti-lynching movement, the civil rights movement, when Negroes and others have begun to look outside the borders and say, who can we move?
Well, in fact,
when you see it move.
Well, in fact, when you look at Angela Davis, that tells us through their trial, that was driven by communists around the world protesting. Robin, final thoughts.
Oh, there are a lot of threads that lead to kind of what it means to be white, and they all uphold white supremacy, to be frank. And one of them is there's a deeply anti-black sentiment in the white collective conscience, and we've got to get honest about it. We have a deeply internalized sense of superiority. No one misses the message. It comes at us all 24/7. I think we also have to look deeply within ourselves and come to terms with all of that before we're going to move forward. And it's not a matter of being good or bad. It's a matter of being a product of a deeply racist society that shapes us.
Robin Diangelo, she is the author, folks, of the book. You definitely want to check it out. What does it mean?
It's much cheaper.
Say it again?
On paperback, it's much cheaper.
What does it mean to be white? Developing white racial literacy. Robin Diangelo, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you all so much.
I thought that was a really interesting segment and worthy of the 18 minutes of video time.